Franke James is a Toronto artist, designer, and writer who wanted to do something about climate change, so she got rid of her bulky, gas-guzzling SUV. Without a car, she didn't need a parking spot at her home, so she planted a garden in what had previously been her driveway. That got her into trouble with City Hall. Whoever said you can't fight City Hall didn't know Franke. She fought and won. Then she wrote a visual letter to Prime Minister Stephen Harper asking a few very simple questions, like, if we aren't going to get rid of fossil fuels, who is? If we aren't going to do it now, when are we going to do it? The Prime Minister didn't reply, but he wasn't happy. When Franke was offered a chance to do a European tour with her art, Canadian embassies first opened their arms and then slammed their doors. They say you can't fight Parliament Hill, but Franke did. She discovered that her tour had indeed been quashed for political reasons. She struck back with another book, banned on the Hill, and with posters plastered all over Ottawa, and later all over Washington. Poor Stephen Harper. Did he even know what hit him? Let me start by saying your presentation at Dalhousie University last night got a standing ovation from a packed house. That must have felt pretty good.
It did. It was really, really fun. It was great. And it was also great to see the age range. That you had people, university-age students and right to silver-haired people.
Yes, I know there were silver-haired people there last night. But neither you nor Steve mentioned how you got there. The story behind your appearance. Tell me about that.
Isn't that fun? Okay, so Steve did reach out to me and said that he wanted me to come and present at Dalhousie and speak at their special lecture series. And we were going back and forth, and the deal hadn't really been sealed until I sent him just like sorry, I told him about the Indiegogo campaign where I was raising money to fund media, my posters on MediaSpace. And I asked Steve if they would contribute to the Indiegogo campaign and thereby get me to come out to Halifax. And so that's what they did. They bought one of my talks, and that was just a wonderful boost for the campaign, and really appreciate their support.
That was the top premium in that offer, wasn't it?
Yes, it was.
If you pay, what was it, $1,000 or something, Franke will come and speak?
It was $2,500 actually. Yeah, because it included, it's got the talk and the workshop, and so tomorrow I'll be doing a climate change art workshop.
And I want to come back and ask you about that too. But at the moment, I want to go back to the beginning of your environmental work as an artist and a writer. And I look at this and I say, here's a picture of Franke James, but it doesn't look like Franke James at all.
Right.
Tell me about that.
Right. The reason that I use this Alice in Wonderland sort of image, she represents my inner self, my sort of, what is happening in the world. This is really upside down. I'm living in an Alice in Wonderland world. And it actually, the moment where I came up with the Alice in Wonderland image was in my story, Paradise Unpaved, where I'm meeting with a city official who is telling me it would be illegal to build a green driveway, and it had to be made of concrete, asphalt, or interlock. And so in reality, the morning after that happened, I woke up in the morning and went, what? That just doesn't make any sense. This is like I'm living in an Alice in Wonderland world. This is just incredible. And then I went, oh, that's who I have to bring in. That's the character that I need to bring in. And so I did this drawing of Alice in Wonderland to represent the upside down world. What? How can that be? I said, feeling a little like Alice in Wonderland. This can't be right, but the city says it's green. So I've had a lot of fun using this Alice in Wonderland inner self as an element in many of my stories now to represent that kind of, in a way there's a certain innocence to it, like the world is, is just upside down and this isn't the way it should be.
It's become almost like it's a little motif or a trademark, right? I mean,
Yes.
you see her all the time in Band on the Hill as well, and
Yes.
in many of the drawings and so
Yes.
forth.
Yeah.
Now, this is bothered by my green conscience. Conscience is not a word we hear a great deal anymore. And what does it mean to you?
I think it's really interesting. And I mean, I was raised in a Catholic family, one of 7 kids. And my mother often talked about conscience. You've got to listen to your conscience. And sort of, that went in. And I went, yes, right, Mom, okay, yeah, I have to listen to my conscience, right? But then, as an adult, I found that actually my conscience was telling me certain things. And I wasn't necessarily paying attention to it. And I wasn't following what the conscience was telling me to do. And so I think that it's interesting that with this, one of my stories in here is called My SUV and Me Say Goodbye. That is very much the story of listening to my conscience, and my conscience telling me, okay, you're driving around in a big SUV and you're saying that you're concerned about global warming. This doesn't make sense. How can this be, right? If you're really concerned about global warming, then you shouldn't be driving around in that big SUV. And I kept on hearing about that. And in my story, it looks like things happened very quickly, but it actually took place over a couple of years where I had this kind of quiet dissatisfaction where I'm going, this doesn't quite feel right. Maybe we should sell the car, And so anyway, my story about my SUV and Me Say Goodbye is resolving that battle with my conscience. And I think conscience is a really, really exciting idea. And I think that we can make tremendous change happen in the world if each of us listens to our conscience. Because each person's conscience is going to tell them something different, something that's right for them. So I'm not saying everybody should go out and sell their cars. I'm saying listen to your conscience and let it tell you a way that you could take action on climate change. And I think that the people who really listen to their conscience and act, in line with their conscience, they feel good about themselves. So because their words and their actions are coming together, they're in alignment, and they feel good inside, and then they radiate that out to the rest of the world. So their friends and family can say, whoa, look what Frankie did. She just sold her car because she's taking this global warming thing so seriously. So even though most people wouldn't agree with, the idea of selling their car, they can at least step back and say, okay, Frankie is living in alignment with her values and she is taking action. And so that's good.
Well, and it draws, the conscience draws out of you the actions that will make you less discontented with yourself. And I guess that's really the essence of what the implicit challenge to others is. Look inside and see what you need to do outside.
Yeah, and so one of the things that I often do at my talks to students, and I didn't do it last night because at that schedule, the talk was already jammed full of everything else. But I ask people, I'd give them the green conscience test. And the green conscience test is a really simple little test, and I've got like kind of 4 visuals. And because I say, most people, maybe you think you don't have a green conscience, right? But, do you ever worry about turning off the lights, right? So, and most people will put up their hand and say, yeah, I think about turning off the lights. Do you ever think about do you ever feel guilty if you throw a piece of trash in the garbage and you should have put it in recycling? Okay? And most people will put up their hand and say, yeah, okay, all right. Do you ever feel worried about, do you ever wash fruit? And because you're worried about the pesticides on them, right? And most people will put up their hand and say, yeah. And so I go through this very simple series of questions that gets people going, yeah, I guess, yeah, all right, yeah, I do have a green conscience, And by the end of it, they're going, Okay, yeah. So I guess I do have a conscience that's telling me those things, even though I'm not listening to it. There is a little voice in my head that's telling me that there's a better way to do things, a greener way. But there isn't necessarily a great awareness. Like if you ask them, do you have a green conscience? They'll go, what's that? No. So I try to kind of awaken people's green conscience through this very little simple test. And I also do art workshops, and those are really fun. And with the art workshops, I've designed my 6 tools for climate change, which, it's things like using symbols and metaphors and actions. But the core idea is to get people to express what's bothering their green conscience. That's the core challenge of the art workshop. And so people will, they could say, I feel guilty because we've got 4 TVs in our family and we leave them on all the time for our little puppy dog. And so one student did an artwork based on that, and it's just wonderful and remarkable to see how differently people respond, and how most people have something which is bothering their green conscience. And when you ask them to pull it out and do an artwork, they can do something remarkable, and then that starts a conversation. So the really fun thing about doing my book, Bothered by My Green Conscience, was that it got me engaging with other people and going around talking to them about the idea of a green conscience and getting them to create their artwork that drew out of them their green conscience. And then you get this multiplier effect where they are sharing their concerns about their green conscience with their friends and family and community. So lots of fun.
And you said you teach interviewing in the course of this, right? At one of the workshops, didn't you say you were going to be doing that this weekend?
What I'm teaching is the 6 tools for climate change. And so that's kind of a system for visual thinking. And I think the core question tomorrow will be, what's bothering your green conscience? So I'll ask them to create artwork. However, once they've created their artwork, whatever it is, it's a poster and it's got their collage on it, I will ask some of the students to stand up and do a video interview. And with the video interview, some of them will stand up and they'll talk about it, and you get a lot more insight into their artwork by getting them to talk about it. And so.
Okay, so you're not teaching them to conduct an interview, but to participate in one interview, right?
Yeah.
They
will be interviewed.
You, not me.
Yes.
Yeah.
Don't worry, your role is safe.
No, I was just curious. I thought it was very interesting because obviously I believe interviewing is a very powerful, technique for getting at stuff.
You're right. Okay, I did mention in an interview that is one of the 6 tools of climate change action. Okay. So I missed that. Okay, so what it is, for example, in my SUV and Me Say Goodbye, you used the technique of interviewing to create this little section. So I picked up the phone and I interviewed my family to ask them what they thought of me selling our car. And that's how I got this little section. So that's what I meant by interviewing. You use the technique of interviewing to pull out, pull out sort of society's values and how they're judging us for what our actions are.
Yeah, and the reactions. Now, did that happen before or after you had actually sold the SUV?
I think that we had already sold it. And one was very unsolicited, where my brother-in-law calls me a granola crunching, tree hugging whack job. I didn't actually have to call him up, he just volunteered that.
I don't know why he can't say what he really thinks.
Yeah, that's right. Yes, whereas my daughter, I was actively seeking her opinion on it.
Now that brings us back to the SUV and to your injunction to do the hardest thing first. Why?
Well, I think that we're faced with a monumental challenge, which is climate change, right? And the question of mitigation and adaptation. So we have society telling us that we should turn off we should change our light bulbs, right? And changing light bulbs really doesn't make you feel very powerful, and it's not a lot of fun. So people may change their light bulbs, but you're not going to brag about it to anyone that you changed some light bulbs, right? So the idea is, how can we make people have a sense of power, okay? And I think that the idea of doing the hardest thing first gives people that sense of power. So, and it also addresses another concern, which is that we can't be perfect. And so when we try to, do everything in our life green, invariably we're going to fail in a few areas. So we end up going, well, no, I'm not really very green. However, if you pick a challenge and you say, okay, I'm going to do something really humongous, something that is a little bit outside of my comfort zone, but this is really hard. I think I'm going to do it. And it could be selling your car. It could be, putting solar panels on your house. It could be going vegetarian, because that would have a big impact on greenhouse gases. And so whatever it is, pick a challenge that you are going to have to stretch a bit, and that once you have done, you're going to be able to brag to friends and family that you did it. And so that's what I think about with the do the hardest thing first. And I also think it's kind of like, when are we going to do the things that are really going to make a difference? Well, if we're going to leave them to the end, and only do the easy stuff first, we'll run out of energy and we'll run out of time to really accomplish things. So we need to tackle the hard stuff first while we still have the energy and while we're strong. So let's do the hardest thing first for the planet. And if each of us could try to tackle something ambitious in our life, I think that it would sort of set up this, in a way, a sense of competition. And that some people will look at me and say, okay, well, yeah, Frankie sold your car. So what? Not that good. I can do way better. Great. Do way better. Do better. Outshine me.
That's a fascinating psychological technique. But the other thing that, of course, that's important about it is, if you leave the hard stuff till the last, climate change is going on at a pace that has nothing to do with your psychology, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. So doing the hardest stuff first means getting the biggest hit first, too, in terms
exactly.
of the climate.
It does.
Yeah.
It does. Yes. It's layered, many layered.
Yeah.
Yes.
So climate is really your obsession, right? It's not, when we talk about, there's a whole range of green stuff that we talk about with various people in these interviews, but climate change is, for you, the key.
Yes. Yeah, really. The thing is that in 2006, we decided that we were going to do a renovation on our house, and so I started to look into energy efficiency solutions and things like that. And as I was doing the research, I stumbled across more and more articles on global warming. And I just was bowled over, and I went, what? This is like the major issue of the 21st century, and we have to take action on it, and we're not talking about it. And so I started doing sort of magazine-style interviews and blog posts about it. And they were very text-heavy and thousands of words, and they took me months to do. Lot of work, and I got almost zip response. And I went, okay, I'm putting all this work into it. What I'm just telling people is important, but I am not getting the message across. And so what I need to do is go back to the drawing board, and I need to find a way to use words and pictures together to really convey to people the importance of global warming and why we need to take action. So I need to combine my words and pictures with personal actions, which is why I set myself the challenge of selling our SUV and telling a story about it, and fighting bureaucracy to build a green driveway and writing a story about it. So. Well,
and you're very fortunate in the sense that you have the capability to do the visual stuff, because that's so powerful.
Well, thank you. Yeah.
And then that leads us into, now you're doing all the visual art about climate change, and I would gather getting more and more recognition for it as an artist now, and not just as an activist. Yeah. And then you get this offer from Croatia, right?
Yes. yeah.
Tell me about that.
Right. Well, in 2011, I got an email from Sandra Antinovic at Nectarina, which is a nonprofit educational organization in Croatia. And she had seen my book, Bothered by My Green Conscience, and she'd also seen what was then my most recent essay, which is What Can One Person Do When 6.8 Billion Are Frying the Planet? And she just loved it. And she thought, we've got to bring Franke's work over, and we've got to set up a tour of her work, and it is going to inspire kids to create climate change art. And they will use my 6 tools for climate change, and this is a whole package, and isn't this wonderful, right? And so Sandra contacted me, and they were going to buy some of my prints. Originally it was going to be 20, eventually it grew to 40. And they were going to buy my work outright, these prints. And so I said, well, this is fantastic. I signed the contract. I got to work on getting all the prints ready to go over to Croatia. And then we seemed to just be hitting just a little bit of a slowdown. And I thought, you know, I'm supposed to be sending these prints over in a week, in like a month. And we've hit some slowdown. So I asked for a phone call with Sandra. And I said, you know, what's going on? Is the show going to get canceled? This was on May 19th, 2011. She said, no, don't worry. The show's not going to get canceled. But I did go to the Canadian Embassy in Croatia, and I asked if they could contribute a little bit of money for the publicity around the show. And I was shocked to hear that you are persona non grata, and they actually, the cultural officer warned me not to show your art. And she said, don't you know that this artist speaks against the Canadian government? In fact, I've got one of my stickers right here. Yes. Yes. So this, yes, the official secretly warned Nectarina not to exhibit my art. Don't you know this artist speaks against the Canadian government? Which is really shocking. And I was just dumbfounded when I heard that. I said, what is she talking about? And Sandra said, well, apparently Ottawa is very unhappy with your visual letter to the Prime Minister. And that was very critical about the pollution for the tar sands. And so Sandra and I, at that moment, so we knew, you know, there was actually another thing that apparently word had gone to Ottawa that this show was happening, and an official said, who's the idiot who approved of an art show by that woman, Franke James? So I got the message. Ottawa was not happy with my show. But Sandra and I thought, you know what, the show can go on. We don't care about this $5,000. I mean, the show is costing a lot more to make happen. Let's just move on.
And so, it's going to a lot more cities too.
And it's going to a lot more cities, and you know, we don't have to worry about it. Who cares about the government? And so Sandra and I decided that I should reach out to a bunch of, you know, well-known people in the environmental community and get support that my show should go on, and that would attract more people to the show and sponsors and all that. And so I did that, and I got some great quotes from people like Bill McKibben and Sephora Berman and others. And but I thought, you know what, I'm a Canadian citizen, and this just doesn't seem right. That it's fine that they're not going to give me any money, but they really should be able to do something for me as a Canadian artist having a show abroad, because they do wonderful, you know, events at Canadian embassies for musicians and writers and artists, and I'm an artist, I'm having an international show. So I thought, what I'm going to do is I'm going to write to each of the embassies in the city where the show is going to be, so each of the 20 cities. And I'm going to ask if I can rent space in any of those embassies to have a little bit of a, you know, a press party, some type of a special event. So the show would not be, the art is not being shown in the Canadian Embassy, but there's this little event that's taking place to honor the Canadian artist. And initially, because I can see this through access to information, the response was very positive. And the bureaucrats said, oh, yes, well, let's try to help this artist out. And yes, I think we might be able to get the ambassador there if it fits his schedule. And this sounds, very nice, very nice. Let's even tag team on it. And then an email came from an ambassador, Scott Hetherington, and he warned the trade commissioner in Toronto, Candice Rice, against supporting my show. And he said, take a look at Fat Cat Canada's Giant Litter Box, which is my story about the tar sands, and it's very critical. However, that was not one of the pieces that was going to be in the show. But anyway, he warned them against showing my art or supporting my art in any way. And I don't really think that that's fair, because the Canadian embassies should be there for everyone. And I was willing to pay to rent the space myself as a Canadian citizen. So to be barred from renting the space, that doesn't sound right. But anyway, what happened when I wrote to the embassies was, it just disclosed more information about who was sponsoring the show and how it was going to be going to other cities. And shortly after I wrote that letter, the show sponsor pulled out, and Nectarina shortly after canceled the show because we could not go ahead without sponsorship. So the Canadian government, their actions of disapproving of me created this ripple effect that put a black mark on me and the project, causing people just to be afraid. And really, that's a form of censorship, the bad-mouthing that they were doing. And so when I found out what was going on, and it was a lucky thing that I did, because this is all behind-the-scenes censorship that's going on. And I was never supposed to find out. And I'm sure the government never thought I would find out. Luckily, Nectarina told me what was going on and what Ottawa was saying. And then I thought, okay, it's good that I'm hearing what they're saying, but I actually need to dig for evidence, because no one's going to believe me unless I've got written proof. And that's when I decided that I was going to apply for access to information documents. And that set in, it's amazing what I've turned up as a result. And over from, let's see, August 2011, when I first put in the access requests, to I think it is March of 2013, I've received 2,172 pages of access to information documents which are related to me. And they're from 4 different government departments. Here we've got Games, Bureaucrats, Play, and over here you can see the number 2,172 pages, and it's got the list of all of the access to information documents from 4 different government departments, which goes from Department of Foreign Affairs, Environment Canada, Ministry of Natural Resources, and even the Privy Council, which is the bureaucratic arm of the Prime Minister's office.
Were you shocked?
Yes, I was shocked. I'm shocked. You would think that the bureaucrats have something more important to do than meddle in, an artist's show in Europe. But I think the thing is that they are very concerned with message control, and they were very concerned back in 2011 that the European Union was deciding about slapping a dirty oil label on tar sands oil. And this is documented elsewhere, there was a lot of lobbying going on behind the scenes by the Canadian government. And I think that they looked at my show, and they were afraid that I was going to have a message which would show how dirty and polluting the tar sands oil is.
They were rightly fearful. That's what the show does.
But the interesting thing is that my initial show didn't have anything that was about the tar sands in it.
Did it not? Okay.
No, it didn't.
Okay.
No.
So what was it? What was the initial show?
The initial show was more about personal action and responsibility, and you know, it was about a message of, you know, doing the hardest thing first. And
the original letter to the Prime Minister was a very simple letter. How did you? Well, number one, tell me a little bit about the contents of the letter, but second, also, how you disseminated it.
Right. Yes. So I wrote this letter, Dear Prime Minister, in 2008. And it's in my book. And it is a really simple letter because I think that we need to ask really simple questions. Simple questions are the hardest ones for the politicians to answer. So for example, you know, I asked Harper, you say the other parties are dangerous because they will tax polluters. But if we don't tax polluters, who will pay to clean up the mess? And then, will my children and yours be paying? And it's just common sense, you know, that we need to tax polluters. And so anyway, I wrote this very simple graphic letter, visual essay to Prime Minister Harper. And I posted it online so anyone could read it. And I issued a press release. And it just, you know, went out and lots of people took notice. Now, the Green Party took notice. And they actually asked me to take that story and publish it as a little spiral-bound book so that they could use it as a fundraising tool. And so that was fun, and I did that. And and I gave a signed copy to Stéphane Dion, which was nice. But I didn't hear a peep out of the Conservatives. And that's why I was shocked in 2011 to hear that they were even aware of my story and that they really didn't like, you know, my art. And so obviously I've gotten under their skin. And
but Big Brother actually is watching in the most literal sense, right?
That's right, yes.
And is biding his time until there comes a moment when you can be swatted.
Yes. Yes.
That's kind of the message, isn't it? Yeah?
It is.
And it is profoundly shocking. I mean, it is because in a way it's the most insidious censorship. If the government stood up and said, look, we think this is damaging to the national interest and we're not going to do it, we could have a discussion about that. But to do this kind of thing all behind closed doors, and as I think you said in one of the presentations, a lot by hints and nods, you know, Franke James, and you don't need to say any more. That's that's the message, eh?
Yeah, that's right.
But you've caught them telling flat out lies too about this episode.
Yes, that's right. Yes. So back in 2011, when the story first broke, they flat out denied that funding had ever been granted, and the access to information documents proved that funding was granted, but then it was killed by the Climate Change Office, which is, I mean, you couldn't write this stuff for a Hollywood movie. This is like ridiculous. Of course, the Climate Change Office kills funding for climate change art show.
Maybe it was the Blue Queen.
And so that's all I can say is thank God for the access to information. And I'm really pleased that that we have that, but the transparency could be so much better. The stuff that I've learned, I didn't know anything about how to apply for access to information documents or anything about it before this episode, and I've learned so much. And what I've learned, I've actually put into my book as tips, and it's called Games Bureaucrats Play. So it's tips for people who are applying for access to information on how to get the most out of them. And I think there are some really good tips.
I think so too. And I'm struck by the redactions. When you get the access to information, it's just line after, in many cases, most of the message is blacked out. And it's on the basis of the defense of Canada. And what's the other?
International security and the defense of Canada. And I think that if you go further down, that they say international trade. And, so I have actually challenged the legitimacy of the redactions I wrote to. I put in complaints with the Office of the Information Commissioner, but those just didn't seem to be getting anywhere. So finally, I wrote to Suzanne Legault, the head of the Office of the Information Commissioner, and I said, would you please look at my situation? You know, this is very serious. And they agreed. Within 1 week of me sending that letter, they had agreed to open a high-level investigation. And then the investigator contacted me and said, you know, she's seen far worse with CSIS, and this wasn't going to be any problem whatsoever, and she was just going to have it done in no time. Okay, so that was April, and this is now many, many months later, and we haven't gotten anywhere. We have not seen any of the letters unredacted, and the documents that I said are missing are still missing. So I'm still optimistic, you know, maybe it just takes a long time.
So there may be more to the story than we know yet, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
I mean, I would just love to see what's under those redactions. And my hunch is it will turn out that it was actually embarrassment to the government and had nothing to do with, you know, the defense of Canada.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, now, there must be somebody now saying, who was the idiot who said who was the idiot that allowed Franke James to show?
Well,
because
I hope so.
Really, there's been this has really come back to haunt them in a very big way. Certainly with the book, but also with the whole kind of media campaign. And tell me how that unfolded. Particularly I'm thinking particularly about the Loud Sauce connection.
Okay, well, you know, back when this initially happened, I thought, you know, this is absolutely terrible that they've interfered behind the scenes. 20-city art show, you know, the biggest show of my life, and it's all canceled because of their interference. And then I need to get the word out, okay? So I knew that, you know, the best way to do it is, you know, to use my experience in actually doing public art. I mean, back in 1987, I had a billboard art show on 48-foot billboards. So let's do that again, except let's take this message of having been censored by the Harper government. And so I contacted through, and this was a connection through Twitter, a company called Loud Sauce. And Colin Muchler was brainstorming with me about, you know, how we can really make this impactful and have people really notice, you know, what the government has done and to really protest this blacklisting and the censoring. And he said, well, why don't we put the art like right in Ottawa, right where Harper can see it? And he was actually thinking across from, you know, Harper's, like Sussex Drive, right? But it ended up that we got transit posters along Bank Street, which was right around the corner from the Parliament buildings, and it was just beautiful, beautiful.
Mm-hmm. And now, and how do you finance that?
Sorry, so we raised the money through Loud Sauce, and Loud Sauce is a crowdfunding campaign. And what I did was I spread the message on Twitter and Facebook. The people showed up, read the pitch, and threw some money in. And so we ended up getting, I think it was about 82 donations from Canada, the US, and as far away as Japan that contributed about $4,200 to buy the media space on the streets of Ottawa. And that was a big success and a lot of fun, And what's nice is that it continues to live, because it's not just about being on the streets, it's about like lots of news coverage as a result of the show, and those articles stay up and people blog about it, and so the message just grows and it's carried.
That's right. That's one of the changes in the internet age, isn't it? That the story in the Toronto Star doesn't go away. It used to get used the next day to wrap fish, and it was, you couldn't even find it anymore. But now it's all there. All there forever, more or less.
Yeah. Well, you would have had to go to a library and search through the microfiche.
Yeah. But now it's just a click away.
It is.
You're a big fan of Twitter.
Yeah.
Tell me about that.
Twitter.
I haven't used it very much, but it really worked for you.
Oh yeah, Twitter is amazing. I connect with people all over the world, and so if we look at, say, the show that I had, the protest art show in Ottawa in 2011, people were tweeting about contributing to my campaign, not necessarily just because they cared about the environment, but because they're against censorship, and they see this as a way to to fight back. And so there are many. I've got a drawing in my book where I show all the different interest reasons why people would want to contribute. And anyway, Twitter is just fabulous. It is such a great way to communicate about all sorts of important issues, and really major social change can happen as a result of sharing information on Twitter.
You don't know where it's going, right? You put up a tweet, it goes to all your followers initially, right?
Yeah.
And then they can retweet it to any or all of their followers. Right?
That's right. That's right.
So it's kind of like almost like a pyramid scheme for getting information out.
Yeah, it is. It is. And the other thing is too that in terms of the media diet, so if we think back maybe 10 years, I was always reading newspapers, right? But now I'm reading the news online and I'm tweeting it online. And so what's beautiful is that I'm not just reading the Toronto Star and the Globe and Mail like I might have 10 years ago. I'm reading the BBC, I'm reading the Guardian, I'm reading newspapers, the New York Times, I'm reading news from all over the world, I'm reading science reports from all over the world. It's just fantastic. The sharing of information is astounding, and the ability to build communities around ideas. I think it is really revolutionary.
Yeah. And Twitter gives you a chance to put stuff out into that as well as take it in. Yeah. It's a real exchange. It's fabulous. It's not like some people go on Twitter and they think that it's a broadcast medium. It's not. It's a dialogue. And you need to have conversations with people on Twitter, and you really get to know a lot of the people. I've met many of the people that I follow and who follow me when I visit other cities. So. And you had a woman who was only a Twitter friend set up a petition instantly to, as soon as this story broke about the suppression. Yeah, Carolyn, yes, Wellner, yeah. And the petition got, what, 5,000? Almost 5,000 signatures, yeah. Yeah, it is amazing, yeah. There's some really good people who are on Twitter and are doing it because they're concerned about, social good and changing society in positive ways. So you get on the right, area on Twitter, and you'll really find it amazing. But the really interesting thing is that it's not just those people who are on Twitter. We can also see that the government is on Twitter and that they're actually monitoring my Twitter feed. So under spies and prowlers, we see that, so for example, the top of this is, subject line is Franke James, Twitter. This is what Chris pulled together last night. And he's got some of my tweets and then tweets that other people, such as Elizabeth May, have done about me. And so that they are using Twitter as a way to monitor, what my activities are. And so, it's all public, and I think that we just have to be aware of that when we're using Twitter, that everything we say is public. On the internet, I would say, not just Twitter. Yes. Yeah. Now, have you had any sense of how this bombshell of a book and bombshell of a campaign, how they've landed inside the government?
No, I haven't heard anything yet.
You say yet.
Yet. And I will be applying for more access to information documents to see what they've been saying, but I have not applied yet. And I'm a little bit afraid that they may not, I may not get very much, because they've got some fascinating things. Here I point to litter box blowout, okay? And in litter box blowout, they say all employees must regularly delete transitory records. So they could say, well, anything we're talking about Franke James is transitory. But then it is unlawful to delete any transitory record once a formal ATIP or privacy request is received or anticipated by the department. So the translation really is delete fast. Yeah.
So you may not get much.
I may not get much, no.
I'm interested though, because I'd almost have suspected that somebody from within the government would have leaked something out to somebody that would have gotten back to you to say, my God, has that woman ever put the cat among the pigeons in Parliament Hill? You know, because I'm sure it has. I mean, advertising in the Hill Times, features in the Hill Times, all that kind of stuff.
Yes, well, that was delicious and fun.
Yes. It must have caused great consternation.
So I mean, that campaign I did on Indiegogo. It's the Band on the Hill campaign, and the idea was to publicize the launch of my book, but to actually take one of the core ideas, which is the government's message to me: do not talk about climate change. It is against government policy. And put that on posters in various cities, and to do online ads on the Hill Times. So we had an animated online ad that dominated for 1 week on the Hill Times and said the whole spiel. It is do not talk about climate change. It is against government policy, and it ended up with the call to action to buy Band on the Hill.
Did it sell books?
I think it did. The book is doing well, yes. So I think a few Cheerios may have been spat out. But, I mean, what's the message? If I was to sit down with Stephen Harper, I would say to him, you really shouldn't be censoring people talking about climate change, because this is a democracy, and many voices, should be allowed to speak up. And so that's why I fought back so strongly.
What do you think he would say?
Well, I'm sure he would have a very politically smooth answer. But I think the thing is that we have to judge people not just by the words that they say, but their actions. And when we see the silencing that's going on, with the scientists, with librarians, with just so many different interest groups are being squashed and silenced, that it's clear that they are supreme message controllers. And if Canada were a corporation, it would certainly make sense. And I think that that's the way Stephen Harper is running Canada right now. He's treating it like a corporation, and they've got the brand message, and citizens are employees, and don't talk against the brand because you're going to get ousted from the company. Well, that's fine if it's a company. You can have control.
It's not even really fine then, but
right.
Yeah.
Right, but with a democracy, it's not all right at all, and we should all be allowed to speak up, and and our right to speak up and our right to freedom of expression is protected under the Charter, and I hope that my campaign makes people really think about the importance of free expression in a democracy. And what I find interesting is that a couple of years ago, I wasn't concerned about free expression or charter rights at all. And it's only through this personal experience that I realized that our right to free expression is being eroded, and we need to fight back, and we need to speak up and assert that it is important.
What effects do you think it's had on you, aside from the obvious ones that all of a sudden Franke James is, when I first met you, I said, oh, the Franke James, right? But it's had, you reckon it's had some effects on you, some deleterious effects on you in a much more private way?
Well, the thing is that if I look at some potential clients, that have talked to me and said, well, we'd like to hire you, right? But then they see my book and that I'm really addressing this issue of being blacklisted by the Harper government, and then they step back and they don't want to hire me, right? And so when a new client or like, let's say I was going to have an art show, there are curators who won't go near my work because it's too political, and they're afraid that they will lose government funding as a result of showing my work. And I've been told directly by some environmental NGOs that they love the work that I'm doing, but they can't say it publicly because they'll lose their they might lose their charitable status. So this, erosion of, our right to speak up, it's insidious. It's really happening.
It's really an erosion of our political freedom, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, which brings me to one other sort of large point. Your very first book was a book on office politics. There is a photograph of you somewhere saying, with a T-shirt that says something like, "Art is politics, politics is art."
Yeah.
And it seems, well, tell me about tell me about the message on that T-shirt, because it seems to me this is profoundly part of who Franke James is.
Well, thank you. But that T-shirt is actually a saying by Ai Weiwei. And it's wonderful, art is politics. And so I'm going to be speaking at an Ai Weiwei event that's coming up, and it's organized by the Canadian Journalists for Free Expression. And it's at the Art Gallery of Ontario. So I feel very honored to be asked to be one of a dozen speakers who are going to be speaking about free expression. And I'm going to be talking about kind of 6 warning signs that our free expression is at risk in Canada. So that's going to be a lot of fun. So, yes, this interweaving of art and politics, and the fact that my book, Dear Office Politics, is a project that I put a lot of time and energy into, is really interesting. That book is actually a game book, and it's an ethics book. So what it is it grew out of a website, officepolitics.com, where I asked people all over the world to send in letters about their problems with office politics, and I assembled a team of advisors who could answer the letters. And this, if people go to officepolitics.com, they can read the answers that the advisors sent in. So what I did was I assembled them into a book, and I made it into a game so that it would make it more fun and more engaging for the readers. And the way that it's a game is the first half of the book are the letters, the second half of the book are the answers to the letters that have been sent in. But at the very beginning, I ask people to use an ethics quadrant, so to decide whether or not, so for example, let's say you picked up Dear Office Politics and you decided that you were going to play the game. You'd have maybe 4 or 5 people playing with you. One of you would decide that you're the person who's seeking the advice, and the other 4 people are giving you advice, okay? And we all know what the other person should do. So that's the sort of the idea that came out of it. So that you're seeking the advice, we all know what you should do, and we're going to tell you, okay? So you have to decide whether or not the advice is good and ethical. and you use the quadrant to decide. And the quadrant has in it a power analysis, who holds the power. It has what's in the company's best interests, right? And it has put yourself in the other person's shoes. And it has the TV news test. And the TV news test is really the ethics test. It's like, if this was on the TV news, how would your advice be relayed? Would they say that what you were doing was ethical and right? Or would they say that you were doing something wrong? So,
all of which says to me that for you it seems as though politics is as natural a part of human life as breathing, and but that you ought to learn to do it articulately and well and with ethics.
yes.
Is that fair?
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah, I would agree with that. Yeah.
That to me is what comes soaring out of the whole story, you know.
Yeah, and I think the thing is that lots of people try to avoid office politics. They sort of keep their head down and say, you know, I'm not going to engage in it. But the thing is that you're just going to get whacked over the head. You can't avoid it. It is as natural as breathing. You have to sort of have your antenna up and be aware of the undercurrent in communications between people that are happening, and to listen to to these things that are going on and be sensitive. So, anyway.
My brother, who's a political scientist, contends that marriage is politics.
Yes.
And I know what he means.
Yes.
You know, it's not the way that Chatelaine might report it, but it's a reality, isn't it?
Yeah.
There's a whole process of negotiation, who wants what, and all of that.
Yes. Yeah. Absolutely.
You have a 3-word injunction at the end of the presentation, which is create, engage, activate.
Yes.
Now, how I look at that and I think, if I'm Franke and I've got my magic paintbrush and I can do this kind of thing, it's you've made it easy to see how that could work, right? Not so easy for people who don't have the paintbrush. So how do they do that?
Well, I hope that that the people would look at those points, create, engage, activate, and maybe they're not going to do it the same way I do it, and maybe they're not going to have the same, you know, the visual stuff, but a lot of the things they could do. They can write stories. You know, maybe they're not going to be illustrated, but they can write stories. They can run crowdfunding campaigns. Anyone can, right? To fund a cause that you believe in. And we can make stuff happen by doing that, and that's so exciting. And the idea of activate, you know, you're listening to the news and you go, oh, isn't that horrible? You know, well, don't just say that that's horrible. Do something about it. So, you know, maybe you can write a letter to the editor that expresses your opinion. Or maybe you can take it and do kind of a fun t-shirt like I did with the I'm on Harper's enemy list. And then that takes the message farther. So I think there are an awful lot of talented people out there, and we can see through social media that people are having a lot of fun doing creative campaigns. You know, we'll see clever t-shirts, we'll see clever YouTube videos. I mean, there's just a lot of creativity that's being shared in social media. And I think that it's a perfect environment for activists to really get the messages out there, right? That are important, that are going to shape society.
And when you see other people doing it, you begin to, this stimulates your own creative juices, right?
Yes.
You may find you're more creative than you thought you were.
Yeah. Like, for example, do you remember Enbridge with their disappearing islands? There was that whole kerfuffle over the pipeline in BC, and Enbridge had a video, and they airbrushed the islands out. And so a group of activists, really talented, got together and created just a wonderful video that exposed what they had done, and it went viral, and it's fantastic.
One of the great big things that comes out of all this also is the willingness of corporations, governments, so forth, not just to shade the truth or make the case, but flat out lie about it, and, you know, lie and intimidate and basically act in totalitarian ways, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
Yes.
Scary.
It is scary. Yeah. And they they just keep on spinning the lies too, even though you go, listen, I've got this here. It's right in black and white. You know, this is an accessed information document that, you know, that shows. And, you know, but what are they depending on? They're depending on the fact that there's so much noise that people aren't going to hear.
And they can make a lot of noise. They have the budgets to make a lot of noise.
Yes, that's right. That's right. Yes.
Maybe your very final message to people is to have fun.
Yes.
Right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because
Yes.
you've had a lot of fun with this, right? In the sense
I
that
have.
you're pulling the tiger's tail is not an unpleasant experience, provided the tiger doesn't get too riled.
Yes. I have had a lot of fun with it. However, it's not without, you know, a certain amount of caution. You know, there's definitely some sleepless nights. Definitely. It is a scary thing and intimidating. But I try to not let that get in my way. And the thing is that it's important to realize that as an individual, in some ways, I have more power to speak out than many of these scientists who are working for the government or, you know, librarians or, you know, whatever. If they're caught in a corporation or in the government, they have a hard time speaking honestly, speaking out. And so, you know, I'm an individual citizen, I can speak out. And I'm not hampered by, you know, authority.
Where do you go from here?
Well, I've got a really fun project coming up. Yes. So right now, the posters, they were in Ottawa, and now the posters are in Halifax. And next, they're going to Washington. And so it's actually going to be a little show in Washington that's going to extend over a 2-month period, where my posters will be going up on the streets and delivering the message that the Harper government has been silencing environmental voices and helping to protest the expansion of the tar sands and the building of the Keystone XL pipeline. So our interests dovetail.
The feisty Franke James, artist, author, and activist. If you enjoyed this conversation, you may want to check out our conversation with Mark Boyle, the moneyless man, or with Robert Bateman, the passionate and prolific wildlife artist. For the Green Interview, I'm Silver Donald Cameron. Come again soon.